Special thanks to Pastor Ron and to so many of our staff and volunteers that make Sunday morning worship happen for us, socially distanced, all that fun stuff, and especially in this season, as today is going to be my last day of quarantine, and that means that next week I'll get to be back in the space of our sanctuary to be in worship with you from that space. As we gather together today, it's not lost on me that we are wrapping up this sermon series on Won't You Be My Neighbor, this series where we have reflected at what it means to be a neighbor, to be one another's neighbor, to be God's neighbor, to be neighborly in the fullest sense that Mr. Rogers taught us in his work. And as we wrap it up, the last two sermons of it have actually had to be from my house by virtue of quarantining in an effort to take care of our neighbors, of one another. So it seems oddly fitting all at the same time. And we come before a phenomenal passage as we finish up this sermon series, looking at what a beautiful day it is, and what a beautiful day it is to be a part of this tremendous neighborhood which God places before us. This story that unfolds in John's gospel is unique to John's gospel. If you didn't know this about the gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, three of them are known as the synoptic gospels. They're known as that because they share a lot in common. There are a lot of the stories that are the same. They seem to work from a lot of the same sources. But John's gospel is different. John's gospel has some wonderful and beautiful stories that aren't found in any of the others. And this is one of those moments where Jesus, after washing the feet of his disciples, something that only happens in John's gospel, Jesus unpacks this commandment to love one another in this special way. Now, we often hear about the stories where Jesus interacts with the legal experts, and when they ask him what the greatest commandments are, he gives them the very, very Jewish response of reciting to them from the core of Jewish tradition, saying that it is to love God and to love neighbor, quoting from Leviticus or Deuteronomy. There are a lot of places that particular passage and the idea can be found. But John's gospel, Jesus has this moment with his disciples where he washes their feet, the one that they've been following, the one that they hold in such high regard, does the work of a servant for them. And even after they protest, still make sure that it's done. And after that, we have this discourse that unfolds back and forth between Jesus as he unpacks for them what is about to happen, and the crucifixion that is before him, and the betrayal even of Peter. And into that space, Jesus offers this commandment to love one another as Jesus has loved us. And the wording of it is so beautiful. I don't want to gloss over it too much. This is my commandment: love each other just as I have loved you. Just as I have loved you. You know, Mr. Rogers is a figure who, for so many of us, embodies beautifully the approach and the expectation he had, the hope that he had for how people could interact with one another. There was a genuineness there that cannot be overlooked, and an intentionality there that cannot be overlooked. Jesus shares that same sort of intentionality in that Jesus does not have an expectation for us to love as he is unwilling to. Jesus is the kind of leader, the one calling us to love, saying, look, my expectation is just for you to live into what I have offered you. Mr. Rogers did that same sort of thing. Intentional moments of sharing in that kiddie pool with Officer Clemens, of sitting down just so that kids could understand just how long a minute is, sitting down with an egg timer set to a minute and then just waiting in silence to appreciate the wonder of that amount of time. That's magnificent. The willingness to make that space and to be present in that way. And so much of the gospel, so much of our challenge to be followers of Jesus that live into being a good neighbor is entering into those spaces with intentionality. Mr. Rogers didn't see the space between him on one side of the TV and the children on the other. He didn't see that as a problem. He saw that space, that ground that he stepped into, that connection that took place in that ground between the children probably sitting on the floor and him on stage through the television. He saw that as holy ground, as a tremendous opportunity to connect with children around the world and to make a difference in their lives, to help them to know that they are loved and to have someone, as we've shared, as we've talked about, help them through the difficult modulations, the difficult transitions in life. And that's just magnificent. Jesus so often meets us in the midst of the difficult moments of life. I know at least in our lives it can seem easier to go to God, to be present with Christ in those moments where we feel like we desperately are in need of something beyond ourselves, of a strength that we don't feel we possess, of a hope that we don't feel like we can fully grasp or see, moments where we long for something bigger and better than what it feels like we're in the midst of. And yet Jesus calls us into the most simple and wonderful work we can imagine, the work of loving one another. Now, admittedly, some days that can be easier than others, and some moments it can seem as though it's the most impossible thing in the world to do, and yet when it happens, it can transform lives in such a meaningful way. My scoutmaster growing up, Crazy Carl, and he would be adamant that we have to include the crazy in describing him. Crazy Carl would approach the work of being present with someone in such a diligent way. Even though the man was covered in tattoos, and depending on what time of the year, he would roll up on his motorcycle either completely bald and with no facial hair, or he would have a beard down to his belly and hair down past his shoulders. But he would approach that space of being present with someone as a sacred space to remind somebody that they are cared for and that they are loved. And this is a man who and so many of us would feel nervous walking up and around just by virtue of the way that he dressed and the way that he carried himself, because he was crass, he was rough around the edges, but he was a big giant teddy bear inside. We all have people who have helped us in our lives to know what it is to be loved. And that consistently is a beautiful thing about love, that it is something that we are shown and given, a gift that is offered to us, and something that we then are able to live into and offer to others. As we go forth from this time, reflecting on what it means to be a neighbor, what it means to be a good neighbor, it's valuable to stop and take stock of all those people who have shown us what it means to be a good neighbor. To not only look with eyes towards the future of where it is that we're going to live into it in the coming months, in this year, how it is that in 2021 we will endeavor to be different neighbors that take advantage of the opportunities of the space between us, where we can build people up and share with joy the gospel and the good news of Jesus, but also to be aware of the beautiful day, of the wonder that is around us, of the ways that God has woven into our lives a deep appreciation and a fullness of that rich love with love that Jesus calls us to share, that Jesus calls us to give as we have received. You know, that will forever be one of the special things about Jesus and about the Gospels, that we are consistently asked to share in something that the creator of all things, however that unfolds, the one in whom we move and live and breathe and have our being, that we are constantly called and asked only to offer what it is that has been given to us, to live into what it is that is given to us. Now, I hope that you can think of people in your life who have helped you to know what it is to be loved and to love others. I hope that I know some folks who encounter the church don't always feel as though they are loved, and that is such a shame. But I hope you do. And I hope that as we go forth as neighbors in this community of Rogers, or wherever you may be joining us from, that we truly live into that authentic and genuine wonder and love which Jesus offers us and expects us to give. And Jesus gives this commandment not just to the disciples but to us. And when he gives it to the disciples and to us, there is intentionality there. You didn't choose me, and this is verse 16, but I chose you and appointed you so that you could go and produce fruit, and so that your fruit could last. When we live into being good neighbors, when we make that space where we encounter those in our lives, when we make that seem holy ground where opportunities unfold to help someone know that they are loved, not only by us, but by God as well, then we do so much to help the day seem more beautiful, whether it's cloudy or it's rainy. And we do so much to make a difference in the lives of the people we encounter, because there is at the heart of every relationship, as Mr. Rogers said, the abundance or the lack of love. And there's not a neighbor, there's not a person that you will encounter that could not benefit from an extra reminder this day that they are indeed loved. Let us be known by our love. For it's one simple instruction that Jesus gives us, even though it can be really hard some days to live into. Would you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, we pray that you would pour out your Spirit upon us, that as we move through 2021, Lord, that you would help us to be the best of neighbors, that we would be able to by your grace and in the work of your Spirit, that we would be able to love those we encounter as you love us. Give us the gift of creativity and how we live into that love in this season. Give us the gift of your abiding presence in the midst of the moments where it is hard to love those around us. And Lord, may we be known by that depth of love. Amen.